Good morning, I'm Miguel Albero. I'm the Cultural Counselor of Spain in DC, in Washington. And I'm very happy to be with you today. Very honored to introduce you to this program and to these authors. 10 of 30, 10 de 30, that's the thing. Huh? I'm very honored and pleased because this is a project that I launched when I was in Madrid as Director General of Cultural Affairs. And we are in our second edition. You may have received this book. If you have not received it, you can have it. Just ask for it, because the idea is to show you these 10 Spanish authors that are under 40. That was the plan. The plan was to select 10 authors under 40 and to promote them, to do translations, so that they can travel around the world. That was one thing, and the other one to be translated to other languages. That's the idea. I always say that you don't impose culture, you propose it. That's what we're doing. We're proposing, and if you like it, we're here to help you. We're here to promote these authors, and we have several things to do that. I'm going to tell you soon. This is one of the projects that Spain has to promote its authors. There's another one here in the States called New Spanish Books, and you can also see that. And there's ACE, Acción Cultural Española, that has grants for translators, for translations. And that's a very interesting thing, because you can use these grants for one of these authors. No? What we select, as I said, 10 authors. There was no rules in we got 5 Spanish authors, and these 5 Spanish authors select 10. There was no, as I say, no rules, no quota. And the idea was that the best Spanish authors could be in this book. As I said, this is the second edition. There's going to be a third one. And the idea is to finish with this third one, because as you know, Spain is going to be guest of honor in Frankfurt in next year. So that will end there. You're going to hear now the authors. I'm going to introduce Valerie Miles, who's going to be hosting this event. But what I want to tell you is that you can do also questions after we finish. We're going to put this on our web in the future, and we're ready to ask for your questions. If you're interested in one of these authors, we will help you with the translation. That's the plan. And we will bring these authors here in the States when the book is published. No? Happily, the world would be a normal world again, and they could travel here. So if one of you is interested in these translations, we will bring the authors here. We have, as I said, 2 authors, translator and Valerie Miles. So I don't speak no more. Valerie Miles, you may know her. She's for us. If she wouldn't exist, we should invent her, because she has worked a lot promoting Spanish and Latin American literature. No? She's an author. She's co-founder of Granta in Español. She's a translator, and she's also a teacher. But for us, as I said, she's very, very important, because she's key in promoting our authors in other languages, especially in English. So Valerie, you have the floor, and I leave you with her and with the authors. At the end, as I said, you can ask questions. But after, you can also ask questions. We'll be very happy if one of these authors is translated in the future, and we'll have a presential and in-person activity here in the States, wherever it takes, whatever that could be. So Valerie, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Miguel. It's wonderful to be here and have this opportunity to speak with Aisha and with Jordi and with Katie. I applaud wholeheartedly this program of 10 of 30. It's wonderful that it's happening now, because it's a very exciting moment, I think, in Spanish literature in a way that it hasn't in some time. I think there's a kind of a new renaissance of voices, of diversity, of different areas that are being discovered and explored, and it's a very exciting moment to be a part of Spanish literature right now. So it's nice to have this opportunity to show some of their work in a program like 10 of 30. It's a very great way to give also editors and translators a good kind of taste of what's out there, kind of a first filter of voices to take advantage of reading. I think since we have here the writers who we have, Aisha De La Cruz and Jordi Nopca, I would like to talk about perhaps two very specific trends that are taking place now, among many, many, many other trends that are taking place in Spanish literature. Truly, it would take a conference of a couple of hours in order to even begin to kind of touch the surface, but briefly, because what to do is hear from them. I will say that one of the great differences of perhaps now and even 5 years ago is the sudden eruption of female voices in the Spanish landscape. It's very exciting, and it's more that women are finally being recognized and given an opportunity. It's not that they weren't there. It's just that for some reason, kind of those opaque forces tended not to give them space, not to give them choice, not to give them even choices about the things that they're able to write about. No, you kind of like, there was this old-fashioned ideas that women can only talk about family, that women can only talk about, they can only be humorous and it has to be chick lit. Well, let me tell you, this generation of women writers in Spain have said, no way. And they're coming out with a kind of audaciousness in many different ways, not just about the themes that they're talking about, but also informal and technical innovations. They're seriously pushing Spanish language literature, and specifically Spanish literature, in places where I think it hadn't been before. So I think Aixa is a very, very good example of that. And that's something that we can talk about with her in this conversation. And because also I think what like the female voices particularly are doing is taking Spanish literature into a place of also denunciation, social and political denunciation, which perhaps before was a little bit quieter on those areas. People kind of were a little bit afraid to actually take on some of these very, very important issues of today, no? And what is literature if it isn't political? The moment that we take up a word and put it on a page, it's saying something, and no perspective is innocent, right? So the women, I think, in this audaciousness are really, really exciting to take into account now. Also, on the other side, and this is a little, maybe perhaps, well, both Aixa as well, but also Jordi, come in this new kind of form of hybridization of genres, where genres, they're kind of coming in and out and using different forms between poetry and essay, and blending them all together into narrative, which is also formally very exciting, and something that I think can be learned, because I think there's a very specific kind of professionalization, if I may, in Spanish literature nowadays, in the sense that Spain, I think, was a little bit behind the trends in the United States towards actually studying literature, MFA programs, creative writing programs, and university level creative writing programs. In the US, we had for so long these conversations about whether creative writing programs actually help or don't help, writers, when we would never expect somebody to go to the Scala and never have studied voice, or, a writer to have never studied technique. And in Spain, there's a burgeoning area now of really extraordinary projects for learning technique. And I think that's beginning to show in this generation, because there are a lot of formal movements that are very, very interesting. And Jordi perhaps can talk to us a little bit about that as well. Finally, I think one of the interesting things, and this will lead us into our first question here, is that some people don't realize how truly diverse Spain is as a country. It's not a huge country, it's not a small country, but it's not a huge country. And yet, inside of this country, there's this enormous amount of diversity and many different languages that are spoken, which means that there are so many different perspectives. We all know how language has a way of telling us about life in different ways. The different ways that we use language have ways of, you know, as we can quote Wittgenstein here, talk about language is the limit of my vocabulary, you know. But I think here we have a writer from the north. Here we have a writer, Jordi from Catalonia. Spain is wildly diverse, and that makes it rich, very, very rich in its storytelling. And so, well, I think maybe that could be a place that I segue into presenting the authors that we have here and the translator who has worked with them, and let you know that we are going to first have a conversation with Jordi and with Aixa about their work. And then Katie is going to read from her translations, just a very short bit so that you can hear some of the things that we're talking about. And we're wide open for questions. We're going to give you an opportunity to ask your questions. So keep that in mind as we're working through. So first of all, I would like to present Aisha De La Cruz. Aixa earned her PhD in literary theory and comparative literature. And I think it's very interesting here that both of the writers we have are doctors in literary theory, which I think goes into what I was talking about, the fact of professionalization, the writers that are coming from a very, very good formation. She's published the novels De Música Ligera, La Línea del Frente, the short story collection Modelos Animales, and the essay Diccionario de Guerra. Today we'll be talking more specifically about her novel called Cambiar de Idea, and she writes monthly on feminism, gender in the periódico Bilbao, and the bi-monthly in La Marea. Jordi Nopca is one of the most widely read and respected authors on the Catalan literary scene. He writes originally in Catalan. After completing his degree in journalism and literary theory, he became a translator and a full-time journalist. His first novel is El Talent, and it was followed by a story collection called Puja a Casa, awarded the prestigious Premio Documenta for up-and-coming Catalan writing. And his second novel is called La Teva Ombra, which is the winner of Premi Proa de Novela, and which is the novel that we will be talking about today. He's been compared to writers like Edgar Queret or Raymond Carver, and he's known for an acid sense of humor and ability to portray the absurdity of everyday modern life. So he's also currently an editor in a newspaper called Ara and editor-in-chief of the cultural supplement. And finally, our translator, who has been working on all of these writers, varying her voice as a translator, Katie Whittemore. She's a graduate of the University of North Hampshire, Cambridge University. She has a master's in philosophy and a master's of the arts in Middlebury College. She was a Breadloaf Translators Conference participant in 2018, and her work has appeared or is forthcoming in 2 lines, the Arkansas International, the Common, Gulf Coast, Los Angeles Review, the Brooklyn Rail, and In Translation. She's working on projects that include novels by Spanish authors Sara Mesa, which is very exciting for all of us. We love Sara's work. Also, Javier Serena, another fantastic writer, Alia Chacol, Aroa Morena Duran, Lara Moreno, Juan Gomez Bárcena, Kaisha Aguirre, and Nuria Labari, some of these writers who are in some of these 10 of 30. So let's get started. I thought we would begin by talking a little bit about Spain and diversity, as I mentioned. And I wanted to ask Aixa, who's from Bilbao, who's from the north, whether she speaks Euskera or in any way has the tradition of living in the Basque Country, has the, I don't know, cadences of the language, has the tradition in any way affected you? in your writing?
Good morning, and thank you so much, Valerie, for your presentation. I super agree with everything you have said. I think it was brilliant. And well, thank you so much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. Though I want to apologize for my English in advance. Forget my clumsiness. Valerie was talking about my PhD, and I have just remembered that the last time I actually spoke in front of an audience in English was when I presented my PhD dissertation. And so it was a kind of intimidating experience, and I have right now like anxious flashbacks coming back to me, so forgive my nervousness. Going back to your question, Valerie, well, the thing is that I attended a school in Basque, and I was bilingual for a time, but my parents never actually spoke the language. So I have lived abroad for almost a decade now, and I'm actually facing this bizarre feeling, this bizarre idea that I'm losing the language. It's a strange kind of loss. And I would love to write in Basque, because I think that literature has a key importance in keeping languages alive and giving them some air when they are minoritary. But I don't have the fluency to do it. And anyway, as I was telling, I think it's an interesting kind of loss, the idea of losing a language you grew up with. I think it is an experience that is unique to speakers of minoritary languages, or languages which are not the main language of the country in which one lives. And I'm actually kind of interested in writing about this feeling, about this idea, but unfortunately not in Basque.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's absolutely extraordinary also the fact that Euskera is a language as unusual as it is, that's so hard to categorize, no? So perhaps some of that poetry, because it's an extremely poetic language, actually, Euskera, the way that it's composed, no? And I imagine that in some way it has to affect the way that you speak Spanish, or the way that you move into Spanish?
Could be. I believe that the contamination of other languages is not fully, you're not fully aware of it. It's kind of unconscious, but I believe it affects the cadence of the prose, maybe. Even though I have became more and more Spanish in my cadence, in my prose. I believe that when I began writing, I was more contaminated in a sense by Basque, which befriends short sentences and more brief syntax. But I believe I have also moved from that. But of course, there are certain resonances which I believe are in my writing. But of course, this is something I'm not fully aware of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Jordi. What about your experience? I'm curious about Nopca as a last name, which doesn't sound either Spanish or Catalan, and yet you write in Catalan before your novels are translated into Spanish. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm, that's right. I started writing in Catalan, so I come from a minoritarian tradition as well. I must as well apologize for my English, because I made a great effort to study English since I was 3 or 4 maybe, before I went to school even. But as you know, keeping up with your English studies is very, very difficult, even if you read, even if you write or email to your friends in English, or even if you watch films, etc. So my family heritage is 100% Catalan. For me, there's no doubt I should write in Catalan, because it's the language I write maybe the best, even though I'm not sure of my possibilities. Then well, for me, writing in Catalan and living in Barcelona, which is a city with many languages, is something that enriches me. So I have one personal tradition, which is the Catalan, but then I have at least the Spanish tradition, which coexists in our environment, so in our city, and also English and French friends here in Barcelona. So then luckily I can more or less practice my English or even my French. So yes, I write in Catalan. My novels are from a Catalan writer, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm, let's say, fully Catalan. So I may be a kind of hybrid between all the cultures I've been studying. For instance, my surname, which is not a surname, it's a nom de plume, comes from Russian. And that's something, well, when I was 20, then I started studying Russian because I've been heavily influenced by Gogol, especially, but also Dostoevsky. And I thought that if I studied Russian, then I could understand better the books I was reading compulsively. So I learned the alphabet. I learned some things in Russian, which haven't been very useful in my life, but they have, of course, helped me to become a better reader. And then that's why I choose Nopca as a nom de plume, which means button. But it's not a shirt button, it's a button that you press. So for me, this election was something maybe that I had in mind as an avant-garde thing. So I am someone you should press in a way, but maybe it wasn't the best idea in the world, but it's something I did when I was 20. So again, forgive me for that.
I think it's wonderful, actually, because you see, I was always under the impression, quite specifically, that you were from Eastern Europe, like you had some, your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather or somebody was from Eastern Europe, and that's why I can see it though in your writing too, a little bit this kind of bent towards Eastern European literature. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, I hope it's not a deception.
No, not at all, not at all. Now, Aisha, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about when you wrote in general, also cambiar de ideas, but I think when you started, I've seen you mention that you wrote because you were suddenly very angry, right? So how is it that this anger was what spurred you towards creation?
Well, that's right regarding cambiar de idea, which has nothing to do with my previous books in the way that it wasn't planned ahead. It was it was born in a very specific context, and it started kind of like psychoanalytic writing for me. It wasn't intended to be published or anything. It was intended to be a way to release that anger you were talking about, and that anger came from a very specific feeling. From a very specific experience, which had to do with a lot of women around me suddenly, all of a sudden, talking about things they had never talked about in the past, telling me about experience of rape, experience of having been forced without their consent, and for some months I felt like I was a kind of witness to all of these testimonies, and I felt that my duty was to listen to those women without any frontier, and that was really painful. And all this anger came from that, from the feeling of I can't do anything with this. I'm only listening, and what can I do with all these testimonies? And so that's the reason why I started writing. And as I was telling you, it started like a sort of release. I started writing to let it all out, and then I became aware that it had something. I mean, I was talking about my experience, but this experience had something to do with the political moment which we were living, and I began to give it literary form in order to make it accessible to the public, because I wanted to do something useful with all this pain I had witnessed.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, it's a sort of a way of exercising some of the fears and perhaps working through some of the pain. But yet at the same time, it's very interesting because this political moment, I mean, we know the world is a very connected place these days, right? And that the fact that we're all going through COVID and that we're having this event through Zoom instead of perhaps in New York, we're all together. But what I find so interesting, both of your writing right now and all of its audaciousness and verve and vigor, is that it's coming out of something also that in the United States, the Me Too movement also catalyzed in a way. And it's very interesting to see how this movement, it was just there. I remember thinking at that time that in Spain, 70% of the readers in Spain are women, and yet, you know, they're not winning the prizes, and they're not really yet able to express themselves in a way where the public is receptive. And then all of a sudden, it just changed. All of a sudden, and it's like this kind of opening of the female psyche and experience that has been allowed. Do you feel that you're part of this kind of a movement with other writers like Cristina Morales, just to think of somebody
Definitely.
else? Mm-hmm.
Yes, a lot of my colleagues have trouble with the generational term, and I'm very proud of my generation. I mean, I understand that it can be troublesome for some reasons, but I'm not ashamed of being called part of the generation you were mentioning, because it's really interesting, and it's almost overwhelming what you were talking about, the idea that 5 years ago you could read a couple of female writers in every generation from the last few decades, and suddenly it's like everybody is writing interesting books, and female, and women are beginning to, we are starting to read other women, right? Yeah. Because it's not only that we are 70% of readers, and we have never seen or experienced in books, but we were also little interested in reading other women, and suddenly that has changed. And it's really, it's an honor to be part of the generation that has achieved such a goal.
Yes, that's wonderful. And well, Jordi, perhaps what I would like to talk about with your novel, and also with, as I was mentioning, something that's changing quite a bit, and that's kind of I see an almost, somebody wrote in one of the reviews writing about your novel that it's almost a sort of modern romanticism, no? You touch on sentiment in a way that perhaps previously men didn't feel that they could do. But at the same time, I think it's how you use the formal, formally, it's very interesting how you change perspective. No, we in the beginning we think we're reading from one perspective, and then you put a mirror in front of that perspective into like one brother and another brother, Pera and Juan, and the fact that these that then the novel goes somewhere else and it becomes almost a conversation on the creative process itself, no? Where I can almost see kind of a neo-modernist approach in some of the use of technique, which it's very accomplished. How did you do that?
I almost went crazy when, yeah, when I was writing this book. And this may sound as a joke now that you see that
It wasn't
I have
then.
survived, but it wasn't, because I had to divide myself, my mind, in two separate parts. And those two separate parts were the part of a younger brother and the part of the older one. And both of them are evil characters from my point of view. So when I started the book, I was conscious that I was going to show parts of not my masculinity, but masculinity in general, that I even detected as toxic and negative when I was a teenager. So, and I wanted to do it in a first-person narrative. So I couldn't judge my characters, which was something fundamental right from the start. So I was almost going crazy, not only because I had to divide in two separate minds, but because both minds were evil minds. And when they suggested me some things, I had to accept them sometime. And by accepting them, they turned into personal nightmares. So my life hasn't been, luckily, like the ones that both brothers are experiencing. And when you mentioned romanticism, for me, it was very important to revise the idea of romanticism and also the dark evolution of that, the Gothic novel, which has been really an influence for me. Because in romanticism we find desperate stories. So my stories were desperate in that book. My stories were in a way toxic. They showed parts of myself and myself as a man that maybe I wanted to hide or I denied in a way. And that's why it was so difficult for me to finish this book. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, no, that's wonderful. I think it's also very interesting to think about how by using those different perspectives, no, and the fact that you change it, but and the process. Well, I can see how it would be difficult, because you can see that these are two kind of characters drawn from like one side and another side of an issue, no? that you were able to bring them in. Mm-hmm. But what about also the process of
So the novel is it was created as firstly as the novel that a character writes, which is the version of the younger brother, and that younger brother finally he presents to a literary prize and he achieves the prize. And only when he achieves the prize and he makes a statement, a public statement, and only then his older brother realizes that both lives have been deeply connected, and they have been connected. And I'm sorry if I'm doing a spoiler, but they are intimately connected by the relationships they have had with women, and this is something I think I should tell, but.
Muy bien. Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, I think we've reached the time in our talk where we should go now to the books. so that the people who are hearing us have the opportunity to hear your voices. Now they're going to hear your voices though through Katie and the marvelous translations that she did. I don't know if you'd like to take just one moment, each one, Aixa, and we'll read Aixa first. If you'd like to just take just very quickly, give us a little context of where and what we are reading. Aixa?
Okay, sorry, I've been asked to remove my headphones. I hope you're hearing me okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read a brief fragment from Cambiar de Idea, which is a book in which I mixed the memoir with the essay, and in which I kind of tried to explain the way in which I wasn't born a feminist and suddenly I became a feminist. It's an easy way to put it. And well, the little fragment I'm going to read comes after a scene in which I tell how I was almost raped by a guy I wanted to have sex with. I went to his house and suddenly this guy didn't want to use a condom, so he tried to force me, but I escaped. And well, the fragment I'm going to read comes after this scene. Al día siguiente me junté con mis amigas y les narré mi desventura tal y como lo he hecho aquí, sin obviar ningún detalle salvo por lo de mi encuentro en el portal. Lo que obtuve a cambio fue una lista de agresiones sexuales que me obligaban a concebir mi experiencia como un rito de iniciación en el universo de lo femenino. Las contaban sin rabia, como se recuerda una enfermedad o el día en que tuviste tu primera regla, y sentí que insinuaban que era mujer porque me había pasado aquello, que ni siquiera competía en gravedad con lo de Sonia y el profesor de arpa que la intentó violar en su coche a los 12 años, ni mucho menos con lo de Lucía, a la que un tipo con navaja le robó el bolso e insatisfecho con su botín, la obligó a arrodillarse frente a su polla para que tuviera un primerísimo plano de ella mientras se masturbaba. Quiso mancharle el rostro de semen, pero erró el tiro y eyaculó contra la pared. Se quedó una costra seca en el subterráneo que atravesaba a diario de camino al instituto. Escuché sus anécdotas con asombro. Aquello no podía ser la norma. En México quizás, pero no en España. O quizás en España sí, pero no en Euskadi. Euskadi era un país civilizado y por eso los independentistas tenían razón y había que amputar el miembro para que no se extendiera la gangrena. De vuelta en Bilbao, tranquila y a salvo, podría seguir defendiendo el refrito ideológico que había extraído de Preciado y de Butler, de las autoras que sistematizaron lo que yo intuía desde pequeña, desde aquel viaje en coche en el que vi por última vez al hombre que me legó sus genes y que no por eso es mi padre. No hay determinismo biológico. Mujer es un constructo cultural, un club que distingue y excluye en virtud de normas arbitrarias y en el que debería sentirme integrada, pero no lo estoy. Nadie, por el mero hecho de tener coño, puede hablar en mi nombre. Yo no firmé la membresía, me inscribieron otros. Cuando se levanta el telón de la performance, cuando el clown se quita el maquillaje, no queda nada distintivo salvo las agujetas en los brazos por haber luchado contra un oponente que no compite en tu categoría por peso, que se salta las normas. Pero ¿quién dijo que la vida fuera noble como el box? Man up. Las chicas son unas lloronas, pero tú no tienes por qué ser una chica. 17.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Fenomenal. Katie?
Oh, I have to follow that act. Wonderful. Okay, the next day I got together with my friends and recounted my misadventure exactly as I've done here, sparing no detail except the bit about getting locked in the lobby. What I got in exchange was an accounting of sexual assaults that made me think about my experience as a kind of rite of passage in the female universe. They talked dispassionately, like they were remembering a time they were sick or when they got their first period. And I had the sense that they were implying that I was a woman because I'd been through that thing, which couldn't compete with Sonia and the harp teacher who tried to rape her in his car when she was 12. Not to mention Lucia, her purse stolen at knife point by some guy who, unsatisfied with his loot, then forced her on her knees, his dick in her face for a close-up view of him jacking off. He wanted to come in her face, but he missed and ejaculated on the wall. It dried into a crust there in the underground walkway she used every day to walk to school. Those stories shocked me. They couldn't be the norm. In Mexico, maybe, but not in Spain. Or okay, maybe in Spain, but not in the Basque Country. Euskadi was a civilized place, and that's why the people who wanted independence were right. The limb had to be amputated to stop the gangrenous spread. Safe and sound back home in Bilbao, I could keep defending the ideological hodgepodge I'd extracted from Preciado and Butler, from the female writers that systematized what I had intuited since childhood, since that car ride, the last time I saw the man who passed his genes to me, but still isn't my father. Biological determinism doesn't exist. Woman is a cultural construct, a club that differentiates and excludes based on arbitrary norms, a club I should feel a part of, but don't. Simply having a pussy doesn't give anyone the right to speak in my name. I didn't sign up for membership, someone else put me on the list. When they raise the curtain at the end of the show, when the clown takes off her makeup, no difference remains except for the aches and pains of fighting an opponent from a higher weight class, an opponent who breaks the rules, but nobody ever said life was as noble as boxing. Man up. Girls are a bunch of crybabies, but there's no reason you have to be a girl.
Thank you, Katie. That was wonderful. And it's very funny because I didn't realize the man up is from the original.
Yeah.
I had looked at that very closely.
Yeah.
Very interesting, wonderful, wonderful fluid translation.
Thank you.
Let's move on now to Jordi. Would you please put us in a little bit of context, and let's read from En la Sombra.
Well, I will read a small scene, a part of a small scene in La Sombra, the Spanish translation, which is included in Diez de 30. And the only thing that you should know about this scene is that it takes place in a girlfriend's place, the coastal village where she goes every summer with her parents. And then in there, she meets Pere, the younger brother, the one who is narrating the story. And then she lets him know how she feels now by giving him a novel she has written, in which she explains that she's actually moving to the US to live. So it's a short scene, and you will hear maybe part of Laura's voice, which is the voice who writes her novel. So in this novel of mine, each character has a novel inside and wants to write about their personal experiences, and they think that their experiences are unique and clever, but finally they are deeply connected. So here we are. La casa unifamiliar, herencia de la rama empordanesa de la familia de Laura, era tan acogedora y elegante como la recordaba. Poco después de sentarnos en el sofá de piel del comedor, me di cuenta de que la alfombra que tantas veces había acogido nuestros cuerpos ya no estaba. La chimenea me observaba con socarronería, comparándome con el resto de los amantes que debían de haberse tumbado en el mismo sitio que yo, recalentados por la temperatura hipnótica de las llamas. Me senté un momento para ir al baño y, de paso, le eché un vistazo a la habitación de la tía abuela que tantas veces habíamos profanado. Allí estaba aún la cocha antigua. Me habría tumbado un rato para comprobar que en el bordado seguía presente algún rastro del placer que habíamos vivido juntos, pero no me dejé vencer por la tentación. En el salón, Laura me esperaba con un fajo de papeles sobre las piernas. Era su nueva novela, Océano Atlántico. No tiene nada que ver con lo que habías leído hasta ahora. Podríamos decir que he cambiado de estilo y de intereses. ¿Qué quieres que haga con ella? Muy sencillo, quiero que seas el primer lector del libro. ¿Cómo? Yo tengo que vaciar la habitación, ver qué parte de ropa que tengo aquí me puedo llevar y escoger algunos libros y discos. Tengo para un buen rato. Bueno, ni que te marcharas para siempre. De eso ya hablaremos luego. Esas palabras han sonado fatal. Lee la novela, por favor. Y dijo mi nombre. Fue a través de la ficción como pude reconstruir la peripecia vital de Laura. En la primera parte del libro combinaba los meses de adaptación en el periódico de la protagonista, que se llamaba Sandra, con el recuerdo bilioso hacia mí. Me había bautizado con el nombre de Eduardo. Me situaba en un barrio acomodado madrileño. Me dibujaba aún más alto y promiscuo. A la hora de imaginar el sexo con Kate, a quien se refería como Rachel, se quedaba corta. Hablaba de encuentros breves, lacónicos, en los que el personaje que me representaba era incapaz de alcanzar el orgasmo porque estaba lleno de remordimientos. Era un ser reconcomido por un estruendoso sentimiento de culpa, escribía. Leí en diagonal los pasajes donde recordaba lo mal que lo había pasado después de enterarse de mis infidelidades constantes. Decía que el motivo principal por el que me había dejado atrás no era que la hubiese engañado con otra, sino que conmigo se sentía estancada. Eduardo es un charco de agua sucia. Con esta analogía tan poco pertinente, definía a mi personaje.
Muy bien, maravilloso. Katie, no,
Okay.
can you read it in English for us?
Sure. Okay. The single family home, inherited from the side of the family from Amporlan, was as comfortable and tasteful as I remembered. Soon after sitting down on the leather couch in the living room, I noticed that the rug, which had received our bodies so many times in the past, was now gone. The fireplace observed me smugly, comparing me to Laura's other lovers who must have lain there as well, warmed by the fire's hypnotic flames. I excused myself to go to the bathroom. In passing, I glanced into the bedroom they kept for Laura's great aunt, also profaned by our bodies on many occasions. The old bedspread still covered the mattress. I wanted to lie down, ascertain whether the embroidered surface retained any trace of the pleasure we'd once given each other. I didn't succumb to the temptation. Laura was waiting for me in the living room, a stack of papers on her lap. Her new novel, Oceano Atlántico. It's not like anything you've read of mine. You could say my style and my interests have changed. What do you want me to do with it? Simple. I want you to be the first to read it. What? I'm going to clean out my room. I need to see what clothes I have here and pick out some books and CDs. It'll take me a while. Well, not even if you were going away forever. We'll talk about that later. That sounds bad. Please read the book. And she said my name. Through her fiction, I pieced together the unexpected turn Laura's life had taken. The first part of the book combined a recounting of Sandra, the protagonist's first months on the job at a newspaper, complete with a bitter portrait of me. She had named me Eduardo. She had me living in a well-to-do neighborhood in Madrid and had made me even taller and more promiscuous. When it came to imagining sex with Kate, whom she had renamed Rachel, she was understated. She wrote of brief, laconic encounters during which my character was so filled with regrets that he couldn't reach orgasm. He was a man consumed with a thunderous sense of guilt, she wrote. I skimmed the passages in which she recalled how she had suffered after she discovered my habitual infidelity. She said the main reason she'd left me wasn't because I had betrayed her with another woman, but because she had felt held back by me, stagnant. Employing a somewhat trivial analogy, she defined my character. Eduardo is a puddle of dirty water.
Marvelous. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you, Jordi and Aisha, for allowing us this chance to listen to you and your voices. It's really nice to have the opportunity to hear the original and to hear the translation and kind of how well done your work is, Katie. I think now we should give a chance if there are any questions from the audience. Now would be the time to ask them. So we'll give a couple of minutes for that to happen. And in the meantime, I'll at least take up one that that came in a little bit earlier. And it has a little bit to do with, well, understanding what it is that you're working on now, Aisha and Jordi. These are, where are you going now that you've got these novels written? Are you working on novel? Are you working on essay? I guess, Aisha, why don't you take the question first?
Okay. Yes, I actually I've been without writing for a long time because I have been a mother, and I'm very, very thrilled that I have started working on a novel, which is, I believe it's a Gothic novel. It's about 4 women who inherit a house in the Spanish countryside and gather there for a few days to figure out what to do with the house, whether to sell it or keep it. And well, they are also trying to find a response to the death of their grandmother, who was the owner of the house and who has committed suicide. And I want ghosts to be around in the house. And well, what I'm really interested in debating discourses on mental health, and also I'm very drawn to the field of ethnobotanics and the way we use drugs nowadays, in comparing it to the way drugs were used by our ancestors. And well, those are the topics I'm trying to tackle.
Wonderful. Jordi?
I think that if you remember my previous books, no, El Talent, or maybe Puja a Casa, the short story collection, and I like disorienting the reader, and each book is so different from the previous one then then is a problem for me, because I have to reinvent myself each 3 years, each 3-4 years maybe. And from a long time, I've been working on a book, a kind of memoir on my grandmother, who suffers from Alzheimer and who has been one of the most important persons in my life. But I am not prepared to finish the book, not because she's alive, which I think and I hope that is something that will be a reality for a long time, but because I think that I am constantly writing about her, but I have not found the ideal form and to encapsulate in a way her experience and her richness. So this is one of the projects I have, an open project, and this is something that I think that I can openly tell, because whether if I cannot feel is eternal, and that would be good news for me. But since I am always writing about personal and intimate ties, couples and families, and the links and ties inside families will continue worrying me as a writer, even though now I may be more interested in how society and politics can influence our daily lives. And I think that regarding this topic, living in Spain can be an interesting laboratory, because one thing that I didn't mention is that my parents are scientists. So my mind hasn't been programmed in a humanistic way, even though I studied literature, and I was thought to be a chemist.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, you studied chemistry.
But then, luckily, I drifted towards my real vocation, which has always been telling stories and telling lies in a way, constructing
alchemy, no? And the alchemical. Well, listen, we're receiving a number of questions that are coming in. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them, but I can answer one very quickly, which is to say, someone missed the conversation in the beginning and asks whether your books were translated from the Spanish or the Catalan. And we said that you write in Catalan, so your books are translated from the Catalan. We have a couple of questions that we'd like to get through, so maybe we should be quick in the answers. One of them is what American writers perhaps either one of you have read and like, and then we'd like to listen to Katie talk a little bit about her translation process. So we'll let Katie prepare that while we ask Jordi and Aisha about the writers that you have, the American writers that you have read and kind of prefer. Jordi, why don't you start?
Okay, so maybe I should recommend or tell about recent novels that I read and that have maybe changed my approach to writing fiction, no? And two novels that have been really touchstones, no, turning points, have been Otessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which is a devastating novel, but at the same time is something really funny in some passages. It's something that is important in there, especially in the last pages. And another novel that was very important for me was The Friend by Sigrid Nunes. I read it last year. I really like writers and animals, so and mixing writers and animals, it can give us a very powerful cocktail. And in that book, I found something very unique that I would link to J.R. Ackerley's My Dog Tulip, which is one of my favorite books ever. But at the same time, I must say that I haven't had any dogs in my life, so it's something that it comes
very
out
literary, yeah, very literary. Well, you know, funnily, Lauren Stein, who was the editor of the Paris Review, once said about Tessa Moshfegh's stories that what he loves about her story writing is that her stories never know they're stories. They're surprised to find out they're actually a story, which I've always thought was, at first I kind of thought was a little bit of a boutade, but then the more you read her, the more you understand what he means. She's a very exciting young writer. Aisha, what about you?
Yes, sorry, I have, the question has gotten me a bit off because I studied English philology. I mean, my whole canon is an English American canon, and suddenly to be asked about, well, what is relevant to you about this canon? It's like, oh, everything. I mean, from Adrian Rich to Don DeLillo. However, I have discovered that I used to read a lot of American classics when I was a student at university, and that lately in these 5-10 years, I have been focused on Latin American writers more and more. And well, I would like to highlight a writer that for me is both Latin American and American, which is Valeria Luiselli, and whose latest book I cried with in an aircraft. It was awful, a great and awful experience. I mean, it's one of the books that has impressed me most in this last few years. And I would also like to highlight Emma Clive's The Girls, which I loved. And well, I'm sure there are plenty of them, but I believe that part of the momentum Valerie was talking about earlier, about a lot of female contemporary writers writing in Spanish about topics I like, has gotten me closest to what Latin American writers are doing nowadays than maybe to the English canon.
Wonderful. That's very, very interesting. And also because not very long ago, I had a really wonderful conversation with a few Colombian writers who are in the United States and writing in English, the same as Valeria Luiselli, no? And one of the interesting things is this kind of trend of the Spanish, from Spain, Spanish, and Latin American. It's kind of like New York has become the new Paris in a way. No, where people are looking more towards now the kind of the canon in the United States than Paris used to be for the United States as well. Always kind of the literary, Arcadia, and now it seems as though things are kind of converging in more in a New York, and maybe perhaps because literature, I think in New York and in the United States is in a very kind of combative mode. So it's a good place to be, when you're expressing yourself through literature. Finally, I think though, let's listen to Katie talk a little bit about translating these different voices and what it was for you to kind of discover through this project that you're working on, 10 of 30. All of these kind of vibrant new Spanish writers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge because the voices were so very different. And I only was working from a 3,000 word fragment. So in general, in my own process, I always read the full book before I translate. And I really like to kind of study the book I'm going to work on. I'm also have a background in philology and in literature. So I would sort of undertake a study of the book first. And so it was working sort of like from a place of disorientation, getting the text, having them come in, the fragments. But it was wonderful. And it's been such a great opportunity to see and get to know really quite personally the panorama of young Spanish voices, and also to see which Spanish translators working into English are also already connected with some of these writers. So I don't want to talk too much about myself. I actually would like to just quickly highlight especially for the editors and publishers that are listening. There are, I have the two books here. So we've got 20 writers so far. And quite a few of them already have works either coming out in English or already published. So I'll just mention that Jordi, our own Jordi Nopca here, has his book of short stories is coming out with Bellevue. So I think that's important to note. And I know that Juan Gomez Barcena already has a book translated into English, so that if people who don't read Spanish are interested in getting a sense of what some of these writers are doing, in many cases, not many cases, but in several cases, English work already exists for them. Also, I'd have people know that the samples, the 3,000 word samples, are quite limited, and I know that publishers and editors can want a bigger scope, an idea of the book. And I am happy. I'll put my email in the chat. If anyone wants more information about which translators might be working with some of these authors, I know, for example, Aisha is a great example. I know of at least 3 translators that have either done short stories or longer samples of Cambiar de Idea, of this novel. So I'm happy to put publishers and editors in touch with other translators that have more work available by these authors, so that people can get like a fuller flavor if they're interested. And I don't want to take too much time, but I'm going to put my email in the chat. And I have a pretty good sense of who's working with whom, and also who the agents are, and what's going on with that. And 100% in terms of the financial support that's available for these translations, to me, it's a no-brainer. These are writers who are smart and engaged and interesting. They will be the people that 20 years from now are like, at the zenith of their career, and they're going to be the big names in Spanish literature. And they have the full weight of the ministry and AECID and NACE and everyone's support behind them financially as well, leading up to Frankfurt. So it's a perfect time to make something happen. So I'm here to facilitate however I can.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. And yes, we shouldn't forget that Spain is going to be the guest country in Frankfurt for 2022, hoping that there will be a Frankfurt in 2022 and we'll be on the other side of the pandemic. And we'll all be reading stories about COVID instead of actually having to live through it. But it's wonderful though that despite everything, we're able to do these kinds of things. We're able to see each other, even if it's on the screen and in the pantalla. We have a chance to talk about literature and talk about the things that are happening, and they're still happening as we're kind of making our way through this, and very exciting things that are happening. I'd like to now give the word back to Miguel to kind of close our discussion today, and thank you all for being a part of it, and thank you very much to Miguel and to Javier and to Aicid and to the writers and to Katie for being with us today.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, all of you, for this wonderful talk. I hope in 22 we'll be here with Aixa or Jordi presenting their novels here in the States. That would be a good sign. So I thank you all. Thank you all, everyone that was present. I want to thank also Javier Serena, who's the soul of this project in Madrid. and
Yes, he is. Yes.
Ander Lopez, who is the soul of this project, and all the other literature programs here in DC. And invite everyone to read these authors firstly, and then happily maybe publishing here in the States. That would be that we've done good our job. So thanks a lot, everyone, and we'll keep in touch. If anyone wants the book, we have copies for you, so we could send it wherever you are. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.